Greetings, viewers, and welcome to the Sage 200 Did You Know That webinar. Now, you may think you've seen this webinar before, but you haven't, because this is episode 2. So welcome to episode 2 of Did You Know That? Episode 2 will be covering the following: the importance of realizing that there are ways in which you can make your processing more efficient and streamlined within Sage 200, lookup tables, user-defined fields, importing of user-defined fields, processing of journal transfers, the transaction listing report, batch imports of general ledger, AR and AP, the reconciliation tool, document profiles, and the GL archive. Right, let's get started. Now, normally within any Sage 200 module, you need to set up certain parameters in order for you to begin processing, such as defaults, etc. Now, these are normally situated under the maintenance option. And if you go to contact management, the same situation applies. So we there have different options under maintenance where we can go set different features. Now, if I, for example, go to transactions, new incidents, there's a whole range of fields that need to be added to an incident before posting, and one of them being the incident category. Now, if we, for example, go to our maintenance, we'll see that there is no option to set up incident categories within the maintenance option. That's where lookup tables comes into play. Now, lookup tables are set up by the administrator, so we find them under administration, system configuration, lookup tables. And within lookup tables, we can set up reasons for agents being out of office, different countries, customer business classifications, customer business types, document categories, incident categories, persons departments, and person designations. Right, so for example, we also want to maybe set up reasons for agents being out of office. Simply a case of saying add. Right, and then for example, under incident categories, we can say, for example, and we're good to go. So we can add multiple document categories, incident categories, etc. And we can then just go and update that. And for example, now if I go to utilities and I want to set myself out of office as an agent, tick that box, specify from and to date range. And there we go. You're out and about, you're out of office. If we then go to our incidents under contact management, new incident, and we can then, under incident categories, we can then specify those categories there. So just be aware that those particular parameters need to be set up under lookup tables. Right, now, when you think of general ledger in processing, the majority of transactions processed under general ledger would be things like cash book batches, as well as general journal batches. And you then need to open up a specific batch, process the transactions, and update the batch. However, we do have an option called journal transfers. And if you're familiar with the AR and AP standard transaction processing, this is actually a general ledger standard transaction processing. So I need to go to general ledger under transactions, and we then have the journal transfer option there. So this can be a case of either processing or transferring an amount or a value from one account to the other, or else you can simply process a normal transaction. So it's a case of inserting a transaction date, the debit ledger account, and then the credit ledger account as well. The amount, the transaction code, and then a specific reference. Right, and post and new. You can then print the journal transfer. And you'll see that it's really is just a transfer with a debit and credit account, the same as a GL journal. Right, and I can process a new one. So simply a case of specifying debit account, credit account, and process and update the transaction. Quick and easy. If you don't want to now open up a specific batch, allocate a batch number, you can simply do it via a journal transfer. Right, so very importantly is that when processing a general journal, that you will have the ability to print the journal before updating it. Now, it may be possible or probable that you need to perhaps reprint that journal for reference purposes, or you did not print the journal before updating it. And we can see how to resolve that scenario. So if I go to my journal batches, and I'm going to open up a new batch, I won't do this obviously via journal transfer. So I'm going to go through to our journal batch, and simply I'm going to go and do a line there. Insert my amount. Right, validate. And I'm now going to go post the batch. Everything's in order. So there's the prompt to go print the batch file. I decide not to print the batch file, and it's updated and posted, no problem. Right, so there may be a situation where I would need to perhaps go and reprint this batch, or else go check which transactions are processed on the batch. Quite simple. So if I go to my reports, you'll see that we don't have the ability to go reprint a journal batch within General Ledger. The cash book batch is obviously available. So it's simply a case of going to Common, and under Common we have Reports, Transaction Listing. So as the name says, it's a list of all your transactions. So for the meantime, I'm just going to go say I want to go and view the journal that was processed, and I simply remove the irrelevant modules for my filters and only use journal, and I can then specify details about the projects, transaction codes, etc., and be specific about a period as well as a specific day. Right, so I'm going to say preview that, and there we go. I can then go and reprint my GL journal, and as you can see, I also have the details of the journal transfer that was processed previously. So a quick and easy way to go and reprint general journal transactions that were processed previously. If we go back to the filter options under your transaction listing, as you can see, we can go and print transactions from multiple modules and then specify date ranges as well as group by certain options as well as sort by certain filters. So as you can see, a really great way to go print transactions from a multitude of modules from one centralized location, and you then are also able to go and customize a layout, etc. Right, so just be aware that you can go use a transaction listing for printing all those transactions from more than one module. Right. Now, very importantly is that within Sage Evolution, we do have the ability to, within master files, to add certain information to master file records, etc., as well as to certain documents when processing in order to ensure that critical information is available when processing documents. However, we do have a unique feature which is called User-Defined Fields. Now, this allows us to go and add certain additional information to master file records, as well as to transactions when processing them. So, in order to do that, user-defined fields can be added. However, this is an administrator function. So I need to go to Administration, System Configuration, User-Defined Fields. Now, on the left-hand side of the screen, it details just the areas where user-defined fields can be added onto a database. They can be added onto master file records, and to documents, document headers, even document lines. And taking that a step further, we can also go specify that when processing either transactions which detailing stock or else ledger accounts, we can then go add user-defined fields to those areas within the database. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to add a field or user-defined field to a master file as well as to a document, and we can see exactly how it is that those display on the layouts and reports or master file records within the database. Right, so I'm going to, for example, go to suppliers, and I'm now going to simply add a user-defined field onto my supplier record. So the field name needs to be specified and tells you that it's a user-defined field linked to accounts payable. And I'm just going to call it, for example, contract. Now, very importantly is that the user-defined field name may not contain spaces. So I'm going to say, for example, I'm going to add a contract field onto my suppliers. And I'm going to say contract status. And what you'll see is that we have different types of user-defined fields, from strings, integer, a double, a date, true or false, or a lookup. And to get details of those different types, I'm going to use the if1 help key. And what you'll notice is that it's going to give us a breakdown of exactly what type of user-defined fields we can set up. A string is just a text field from 1 up into 250 characters, where it's the case of the user will insert text information into the field. An integer is a number with no decimals up to 10 digits. A double are numbers with decimals up into 17 digits. A date is just a date field. And then true or false could be a checkbox. A lookup allows you to specify a drop-down table with various options that can be used for selection. So I'm just going to create, in this case, it's going to be a lookup field. And I'm going to say, for example, different options here. If I am using a lookup field, I need to separate the options with a semicolon. So I'm going to say, right, new. Right, so I'm going to specify my various values that are going to be applicable on my dropdown. And what you'll see is that we have the ability to use a force value. A force value simply means is that you won't be able to save the record or process the document until the user-defined field has been populated in those areas. And then we can also use something like a default value if necessary. Right, so I've got my options there, and I'm going to now update or complete the user-defined field. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to add another one, and this one is going to be a date field. And if I use the date option, you'll see that we can default to today's date, either yes or no. And then we can also use a force value if needed. So I'm going to say, right, okay to that. So I now have my two UDFs for my supplier records. And I'm then going to go add one for inventory invoices. So inventory document invoice. And I'm now going to add a new one. So as you can see, it tells me it's an ID for an invoice. And I'm now going to say put some details in there. And this is going to be just a lookup field. Right, so I've got my values there and I'm good to go. Right, so now when I close and update these user-defined fields, a process will take place, which is the refreshing of the views. It simply means is that SQL is now going to populate the relevant tables with columns for the UDF fields that I've added onto the relevant areas within the database. This may take a while to accomplish, specifically if you added a multitude of user-defined fields to multiple areas within your database. Right, so we're good to go. Now we're just going to go and check on the supplier master file records to see exactly how those user-defined fields display. And let's just wait for this to refresh. Right, so if I go now to my suppliers, and I'm going to add an existing supplier. And what you'll see on the left-hand side is that we now have additional fields option, where we can now view the user-defined fields. For example, there are 2 user-defined fields. I can specify that one, and then I can specify the date field if required. Right, so there we go. We then obviously complete the supply information and populate those user-defined fields as required. Now, if I go to an existing supplier and I open up that supplier, I also have additional fields option here, which just shows that the user-defined fields updates accordingly, which then is applicable to existing records as well as new records that are being created. So once again, I can also now go add that information for the UDFs to existing records which have been created previously. Now, if we then go over to our document, and we can check the user-defined fields from there, I'm going to go to Inventory and Transactions, Invoice. Now, when I open up the invoice, you'll see that there's also an additional fields option there, where I've got my user-defined fields, which I can populate when processing the transaction. Right, so let's just go and see how easy it is to actually allocate. Remember is that by default, the UDFs will not be on your document layout, and it really is an easy process to go add them. So I'm going to go to my document layout, and I'm going to make a copy of my existing one. And once the layout opens, we're then going to go add those user-defined details onto the layout. So first I'm going to add a label, which is a simple process. There we go. And very importantly is that we do have a video snippet webinar on the KB site with information about how to customize your document layout. So if you want to check it out, log into the KB site and you can view that video as required. So I'm just going to say, for example, and then now that's the label sorted. So I'm just going to go add actual database field and a DB text. Let's expand that slightly. And right, so because it's on the header of the document, we now need to go look at the num option, which is the header, PLINV num. And remember is that all UDFs have a prefix of U. So I'm just going to go and find the U, and there we go. There's the root number. And we're done. Easy as that. I'm going to save this layout. And once that's done, I'm now simply going to go use the new layout when printing a document, and let's just go and process a transaction to see how it displays. And I'm just going to, from the drop down, specify the relevant root, and we're good to go. So there's my details, process, and print the document. And there we go. So quick and easy, I can then go and display my UDF information onto my document layout. Right, so now we need to go and think. We know that UDF fields can be added to master files. However, we also have the ability to go and import UDF fields by using the data distribution services. So for example, you may want to import some master file information, want to include the UDF on there. You certainly can do that via the data distribution services. Right, so let's just go through to our data distribution services. And I've gone to go and create one for suppliers. And let's just go to properties. So this is your normal DDS import. And what I've got here is that in the meantime, I've gone to go and create a CSV file with information I want to import, and consisting of 3 columns. So I've just got the supplier account number, the supplier name, and also details about the user-defined field. Right, so if I then go through to I'm just going to open up Sage 200 again, and it's very important is that when we importing UDF, so we get the naming convention correct. So under suppliers, let's just go to that's user-defined field we want to import. Right, so let's just go check the details there. Very importantly that the field name and description are entered correctly. So I've got my information, the publisher 2 of 2. I'm just going to delete the existing one, and I'm going to add a new user-defined field here. So once again, description, let's just confirm that. Description name is contract status. Right, so let's just go add that there. And then field name, let's just go check those details. Okay, ULAP contract. So let's just go add those details there. Lowercase u, lowercase l. Right, let's just confirm that. ULAP contract. Just going to change that slightly. There we go. Right, so now I've added my user-defined field, which I'm now going to just place in the relevant location on the mapping. Right, so there we go. That looks in order. And let's just go confirm a couple of options here. Okay, that's pending, so we can use one of those data values. And I'm just going to call this pending. Right. Right, so my import file looks in order. It's .csv file, no problem there. Right, the mapping looks correct. And let's just go to our subscriber, change the database. Right. And it looks like we're good to go. Now, very importantly, ensure that the import file is closed before importing. Right, let's just go there. We're just going to close this. Right, and then we're just going to go run the data distribution import and we'll see the status. Right, so everything looks to be in order. We're good to go. And run now. Just go check the log file. And it looks like that's been successful. And now it's simply a case of going into our master file for suppliers and we can check the details. Maintenance, suppliers. Right, there we go. There's our new supplier we've imported. And if we go to edit and additional fields, there we go. There's the UDF field which has been updated. So a very similar scenario with regards to importing normal records. However, you would need to then go add the UserDefined field and ensure that you've got the correct naming convention for the field name and description in order to import. Quick, easy, and simple. Right. Now, what's important is that when all modules, for example, with the batch processing, allows you to import and export batches. And that relates to, for example, cash book and journal batches, accounts payable, accounts receivable, as well as inventory batches. So you may have scenarios where you use a batch very often and you prepare the information in a CSV file and at regular intervals go and import that. For example, something like maybe a payroll journal, etc. Now, let's just go look at the processes in order for you to import batches into Sage Evolution. So I'm going to use two examples here. One's going to be a normal journal batch and a general ledger. The other one's going to be an accounts payable batch. So if I go to general ledger and transactions, I'm going to open up a journal batch. And the easiest way to do this is simply go create a template. So I'm going to then go create a two-line batch with a debit and a credit. And we're then going to use that as a template. Right, put in a value. Right, so 2 lines. There we go. And I can now say save. The next process is going to be, I'm going to export this batch. And there we go. I'm now going to export it. Just give it my own naming convention. With a .csv extension in order for import it later. Right, and we're good to go. It's always good to export the batch with a header record, which will make it much easier for you to populate the batch, know exactly which information needs to go into which columns. Okay, to that, just say, let's go change that slightly. Right, I think that's in order. No errors were found, which is great. So if there were some errors, I could go view them in the log file. If you want more information about the message log viewer, you can tune into episode 1, which is available on the knowledge base site for a detailed review on the message log viewer and what the function features are within that functionality. Right, so no errors, no problem. And I'm just going to now go and close this batch. And if I go to my location where it's been exported to, there we go. So there's my exported batch, and I would then need to just go and populate the batch with my relevant information. So I'm just going to just change a couple of things slightly here. And we can then use the same format for importing. And then, as I say, you'd need to populate these fields with the relevant details and then use that as the import template. Right, so I've made a couple of changes there, and I'm going to save this and close it. Now I'm just going to open up a new journal batch. I could obviously use the old one or existing one if I wanted to, but I'm going to use a new batch. Right, and let's just go to batch import. I now need to go browse for the batch that I want to import where my changes have been made. There we go, open it and include those details, no problem. It has a record, so I'm going to mark that option. Okay, no errors, which is great. And there we go. Quick and easy. I've now imported a batch which I prepared previously with my relevant information. Quick and easy and simple to do. Right, so that's the importing of a general journal batch. However, we can also import AP and AR batches. And I'm going to go now to my suppliers, transactions. And let's just go through to our supplier batches. Right, so once again, I'm going to open up a new batch and create a one-line template, which I'm going to be using. And simply a case of your account code, the transaction code, and then just put in a value. Right, that's a one line, so I've got my details, my template, and I'm now going to just go validate. Right, save it, and now I can export that batch. Let's just say export. And with the .csv extension. Right, and we're good to go. Export header record, no problem. And if I now go to my export location, there we go. So with an AP or an AR batch, there's a whole range of columns if you compare them to the actual GL journal batch. So you would obviously need to simply go and insert the relevant details in the columns because you now have your blueprint. And I'm just going to make a couple of changes here. Right, so I've populated the relevant column that I need to, and I'm going to save that. Right, I think we're good to go. And we can now, I'm simply going to go and close this batch, open up a new one, and import my details into the new batch. Right, so batch, I'm going to import, browse for that batch. Let's just go find it. Okay. Now, very important, on the left-hand side of the screen, there's an option called field mapping. This is very important with regards to importing of AP batches as well as AR batches. Now, very similar to the DDS field mapping. You'll see we've got a whole range of options there. Now, these are all the columns that can be imported via the batch. And what you'll notice is that there are 4 compulsory columns. These include the transaction date, the account being the supplier account number, the module, as well as the transaction code. So those are the 4 compulsory fields. So the others are not required or not mandatory. So I'm going to unselect all. And by default, on on a new database, when you do a first import, only the 4 compulsory fields are marked. So a lot of times, perhaps users will import an AP or an AR batch and then only have, for example, those 4 fields details appearing or being imported. So just be aware is that by default, the other options are unselected, and you may then encounter a situation where, for example, the reference or description or the amount isn't imported simply because you need to go allocate the field mapping to those columns. I'm just going to say select all to this option. Right, that looks in order. Okay. And we've got our import file there, no problem. And if I say okay, no errors, which is no problem, which is great. And there we go. I've imported my AP batch from my CSV file with all the relevant fields that are required. So a quick and easy, simple way to import your AP batches, AR batches, inventory, etc. Create the template, populate, and then import as required. Right, so moving on to our document profiles. Now, if you consider maybe in a retail point of sale environment, you've got different tills, and different tills have different operators. So you can immediately see by maybe looking at the till slip or the actual document, which user processed which particular transaction. However, if you want to implement a similar scenario without using retail point of sale, you can use the option called document profiles. Now, document profiles allows you to create a range or number sequence for a group of agents or individual agents with regards to numerous source documents. And to do that, we need to go to Administration, Agents, and we've got a couple of agents set up here. So you can do it in 2 ways. We can then go create a document profile, link it to the agent, or else we can then go link an agent to a document profile from this particular screen. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to go firstly create a document profile range. So that's under your Administration, Document Profiles. And I'm going to go create a specific sequence. Now, I'm giving it a code and a description, and we can create a whole range of document profiles from invoices to credit notes, GRVs, RTSs, sales orders, POs, etc. So you can specify a range of document profiles for many types of source documents. Okay, and then using defaults, we won't be doing that simply because we can then specify a prefix, and we can then pad up to a certain number of characters. And then once again, what we can then do is we can simply specify that for this particular range of documents, you can use a specific layout when printing or emailing these particular documents. So you can be quite specific about the email settings as well as the printing of documents. And if you're going to be using text per document or exclusive, etc. So I've set up my relevant my code or my documents for this particular user, and I'm good to go. And now I'm just going to go and set up another one for a different user. And once again, I'm just going to and set up those defaults. So there we go. And now I have a range of documents, of invoice documents for these particular users. So I'm just going to, what we can do is if you go to edit, we can then go into the document profile, and you'll see that we've got an agents tab there where we can then go and link these particular document profiles to an agent. However, we can also do it if I go to the agent themselves. So I'm going to Administration, agents and open up this one, edit. Right, and what you'll see with document profiles, I'm just going to remove that one and add a new one. So select an existing one, that is. Right, so there are those invoices. Right, it is active, no problem there. And I'm just going to go to the other agent. And I'm going to add that range there. Document profiles, select, and there we go. Right, so now I'm going to just log in as one of the users. Right, and I'm just going to go to open up one of the invoices for the user and just go in there, inventory, transactions, invoice. And when we log in, you'll see that we now have a range of document numbers specific to that user. And then we can then track simply by seeing or looking at the document number exactly which user processed that particular document. So a really quick and easy way if we determine exactly who processed transactions, stuff like credit notes, purchase orders, RTSs, etc. You can all link them to document profiles. Right. Now, we really have a very useful tool in Sage. It's called the Control Account Reconciliation Utility. Now, very often is that you may encounter instances whereby people are reconciling their subsidiary ledgers to their control accounts, and there are differences. A good example would be if you were to go, for example, look at your aging, see what the total amount is owing by your debtors, and then compare that to your control account in the general ledger. There could be differences. Again, same thing applies with inventory valuation versus inventory control, supplier control versus your supplier aging. Now, to make that whole process a lot easier to determine where the imbalance comes in, we've created a tool called the Control Account Reconciliation. And that gets found under your General Ledger Transactions. Right, Transactions, and there we have it, a Control Account Reconciliation. Right, so when it opens, you'll see that we can do a reconciliation for customers, suppliers, and inventory. And then we can specify from and to date range, and then also details about control accounts and account types. It's possible that perhaps you may have multiple supplier control accounts or multiple inventory control accounts. You can obviously specify them there, and then also your account types. So let's just go and check how exactly we can pick up a scenario here. So I'm just going to, in this instance, log in as administrator, and we'll do a couple of transactions to see the outcome of the control account reconciliation utility. Right, so I'm just going to now, let's just focus on this customer side. So I'm going to now go and process an inventory invoice. Right, so invoice it is. Right, so normal inventory invoice, process it, and I'm good to go. We won't print it. And let's just go now through to the control account reconciliation and check what has happened. Okay, so there we go. And I'm going to use for customers for today's date. And I'm just going to say, for example, control accounts. There we go. And let's just say, right, so we're good to go, and we'll say view that. Right, so what you can see has happened here is that we've got our transaction, which was this particular invoice. There's a debit, which means a subsidiary account has been updated, or a subsidiary ledger, as well as a general ledger. There's no differences there, and as you can see, this transaction has been marked as reconciled, which simply means is that the transaction appears in the general ledger as well as the subsidiary ledger, and everything is in order. Great, no problem there. Now let's just go and create a scenario where we are going to have a difference. So to do that, I'm just going to go to a general ledger account, and on my receivables control, I'm going to process a direct journal. Now, on every GL account, we have an option that says allow journals. And by default, on the control accounts, the allow journals option is deselected. We can create a new database. So I'm going to allow that option, allow journals. There we go. And I'm now going to process a transaction which is going to cause an imbalance. So it's going to do a journal batch. And I'm going to find my receivables control. Right, so I validated that, and we know that's going to go to receivables control account, which is going to be a direct person to the general ledger. It won't have any impact on your subsidiary customer ledger. Right, so everything's in order. I can post the batch. I won't print the batch now because I know that I can do it under our transaction listing report. And updating. Right, let's just go check under your transactions control account reconciliation feature. Right, there are my details. Okay, and I think we're good to go. Let's just go view that. Right, so as you can see, we've got details. Those two transactions have been reconciled, no problem there. However, you can see there's an indiscretion or a problem over here. This is our direct journal posting. It hasn't gone through to the subsidiary ledger. However, the GL has been debited with that value, and we are sitting with the difference of that amount. And as you can see, the status is now set to flagged, which means is that there's a difference here, which would need to be investigated, which is causing the difference between our control account and our customer aid analysis, etc. So I've got the details there, and we know that this is our transaction causing the difference. And what I can simply do, I can pick it up on the audit number. So I can go and clear this, clear that, and I'm now simply going to go, and easiest would be just to go around an audit report, audit trail report. And we know the number, And I'm just going to say run that. And let's just go to the last page. And there's my audit number, which was the transaction causing the imbalance. And I can search investigate the option from there. So really is a very useful tool if you are reconciling your control accounts versus your subsidiary ledgers. And we can then obviously pick up exactly which transactions causing the difference and go investigate further. So a very useful utility within the application. Right, so we know that by default, when creating a new database, you do have 5 years of processing transactions. And with Sage Evolution or Sage version 720, the option is there to create unlimited financial years. Now, you may at some point need to purge your database simply because it becomes too large and you want to clear some information from the database. However, we do have the ability to archive information, and that gets done by a GL archive. Now, as the name implies, it simply means is that you archiving, you're putting information in a certain location to be available for future viewing purposes. Now, we just need to differentiate between archive and a purge. So if I go to my general ledger, we have a GL purge, which simply means is that you're purging information, you're deleting those details from the database. And the only way to retrieve the information would be to restore a backup. Now, we're looking at, for example, that general ledger archive. It simply means is that you're taking the information and moving it to another location where it can be viewed for reports, etc. So let's just check the scenario here. Is I'm going to go and do a GL journal. And I'm just going to go check my details on my company periods first. So if I go to my company details, you'll see that under accounting periods, we've got a purge and an archive column. So my financial year runs from January to December. So I'm just going to go and process a transaction via journal batch for a period or financial year which I'm going to be archiving. So let's just say, right, there we go. Okay, and it's going to be for right, so that's a transaction processed in the first period of my current financial year. Right, no problem there, posting the batch. Right, so let's just go to reports, and I'm now going to view just a trial balance. Let's just say for that period. And we're good to go. So there's my transaction, no problem. So now I'm going to go use or do a GL archive. And very importantly, I need to make sure that no one's in the system when doing this, and that I made a backup, and obviously ensure that you archive in the correct year. So there we go. There's my year 2, which is my current financial year. And remember is that once I archive a year, we cannot go to an unarchive. So just be aware of that. And there we go. Right, that's been completed. No errors, which is great. And now what has happened with the archive is that the system has moved all the transactions from that specific financial year that I specified, moved them into a separate SQL table where they are available for viewing purposes only. So I'm just going to go through to a journal batch again, new batch this time, and I'm now going to process a transaction in the second period of the year that I archived. Right, let's just go validate there. And as you can see, it tells me that transactions to the date range have been archived and the batch cannot be processed. So I'd need to obviously either go and process it to an unarchived period or an unarchived financial year before I can process. So I can save the batch, but unable to post simply because that particular financial year has been archived. And if I then go to my reports, I can then go to trial balance. I am still able to go and view transactions for that period. So let me go, there we go. So there's my transaction process before the archive took place. So very importantly, realize is that archiving allows you to go view transactions for the period that was archived. However, you certainly cannot go and process transactions in the archive period. Right. So as you can see, a whole range of useful features within Sage 200. That's a wrap from me. Thank you so much for watching. It's over and out, and goodbye.